What is up, Heat Seekers? We are back with a special edition with some people that you don't normally see on the Dynasty Heat Seekers. We've got some defensive guys here. The IDP Heat Seekers are in the house with myself to mock after the NFL draft. There's a lot of changes we're going to see today. Before we get into that, before we start up this mock draft, Brad, what was the biggest surprise to you in the draft? It could just be in the first round or something that you've seen later, but what was the biggest surprise to you when it comes to fantasy for the draft?
I mean, I think anybody's going to say Jahmyr Gibbs going in the top 15 is probably the biggest surprise. You know, we all liked him going into the draft, but we did not like him like top 15 NFL draft. So I think that's really going to be the biggest change, and especially what we see in this mock. I have no doubt that Jahmyr Gibbs is probably now top 5 or 6. Wouldn't surprise me in the least if somebody did it.
Craig, how about yourself?
Just from the pre-draft talk, of course, Will Levis falling. Everyone had, those rumors swirling around him about him going up in the top 2 or something like that, and then he falls out of the first round. So, first round offensive talent-wise, that we're talking about tonight, probably that. But there were a number of big-name defensive people going up to the draft that were pretty high in a lot of people's rankings that fell late into day 2. Or undrafted, which was certainly interesting from an IDP perspective.
All right, speaking on that, another one for me, just to throw it out there, and I think there's been some news that it was medical, but Sean Tucker falling out of the draft. Did that surprise you guys as well?
Yeah, I bet he's a priority UDFA for somebody, but yeah, I mean, with the heart stuff, I think that's, is a concern. It sounded like he was cleared. I mean, he did his pro day workouts and did pretty well at the pro day, so I was really surprised that he fell completely out of the draft. Craig, what do you think?
I think Craig froze. Going off of that, which team, Brad, do you think got the best grade of this NFL draft?
Ooh, that dreaded grading. I really like the Pittsburgh Steelers draft overall. I think they really helped their skill position players by beefing up the offensive line, getting a guy like Darnell Washington who slipped further down due to medical reasons. I think that Pittsburgh kind of turned in the best all-around draft because they helped Kenny Pickett and Najee Harris because they beefed up that offensive line. What do you think?
I mean, there's a lot of arguments to go around, right? You can talk about Philadelphia getting potentially 2 of the top 5-6 defenders in the first round, with Nolan Smith dropping to them at 30 and getting Jalen Carter at 9 after moving up with my Bears. I could argue my Bears with everything that they got from that first round pick. It basically netted them DJ Moore and Darnell Wright, the right tackle that they really needed, plus some extra picks later. And they got the move down at 9 to pick up an additional 4th in later drafts. I think we could argue, I thought Seattle did really well, bringing in that cornerback at 5 and getting JSN later on in the first. Craig, what were your thoughts on teams that really did well in the draft?
Yeah, you guys talked about a few of them. One of them that didn't have a whole lot of picks that I thought did well overall were the Miami Dolphins. They got a cornerback in the first pick. It was the second round, Cam Smith, to add to that secondary, and then getting Devin Achane in the third round. Certainly the speed fits there. They got some offensive line help really late, and same thing with a wide receiver, sort of tight end hybrid type of guy in Elijah Higgins, and they certainly don't have a whole lot at tight end. So with the limited picks that they had, given because of trades or forfeiting a pick, I thought they actually did pretty well.
Absolutely. I mean, they made the most with what they had, and it wouldn't surprise me if Shane is in the starting lineup by the end of the season regularly, just because of how dynamic he is.
We'll continue talking on all of this great stuff from the draft, but we're going to get this mock draft started up. Let me make sure everything's set right here. We know Sleeper likes to pull some tricks on me here. But we got Jay Frazier, 23, up with the first pick. I think that this is pretty much consensus. We talked about Gibbs going at 12 being somewhat of a surprise. We weren't even sure where Bijan was going to go. There were rumors that he could go where he went, as high as 8. But there were also talk that, he could fall to late teens, early 20s, which kind of made it a surprise that we got both of those running backs inside the top 12. Is he, Kraig, your number one pick in Superflex and 1QB, or are you considering taking quarterbacks at number 1 in those drafts?
Given what we've seen out of the current head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, what he was able to do with Jalen Hurts and the quarterback that they took there, Anthony Richardson, just because of the potential massive upside that he has, if I truly earned that first pick in the draft and I'm trying to find a quarterback, I'm definitely considering him the first overall, and I've seen him in several leagues that people are posting on Twitter and all over with a quarterback going ahead of Bijan. And I don't think it's because of where Bijan went. I think a lot of people are just excited what the future could hold for Anthony Richardson there.
What do you think about that, Brad?
For me, I struggled with Bijan has to be 1-1, right? Like, the talent is there, and you know that he went to a team that really wants to run the ball a ton. The struggle I'm having is kind of what's next. I know our boy Shane took his homer pick and went with the Carolina Panthers quarterback here too, but having the conversation in our RotoHeat Discord today, talking about what do you do at 1-2 on? I think I'm still firmly in the CJ Stroud bucket. I know his ceiling isn't as high as Anthony Richardson. If Anthony Richardson can get to where he is, but so many people are going to overdraft him, he is not even remotely close to ready to start like Jalen Hurts was. Jalen Hurts played in big games. Anthony Richardson couldn't beat Vanderbilt. I mean, he's going to need time to develop, and if he gets thrown out there, which it sounds like he could be a day one starter, man, I mean, the rushing upside's there, but the long-term value there could be. I mean, do we see a guy that gets beat up because the offensive line isn't great? It's got a couple of really nice pieces, but needs some help. He's got some skill position players that are really good, obviously, but I'm just scared that I would rather feel safer taking a guy like CJ Stroud, who I know what I'm getting with, or over a guy like Anthony Richardson. I still think, as I worked on my rankings post-draft, I still have Anthony Richardson kind of in the 6, 7, 8 area if I'm going, if I really need to go quarterback. But CJ Stroud is still at the 2 for me. Bryce Young, I love the intangibles. He's so smart, but he's so little, and that scares me.
1 second here. I'm trying to message Jeff and let him know that he's on the clock since he joined and then isn't here. I'm on the Anthony Richardson train. I think he is going to start from the beginning, and I think similar to Justin Fields, he can make up for a lot of the deficiencies with his athleticism, and for fantasy, that's going to be fine. I do have CJ Stroud behind him, but I am in the camp of Bijan as the 101, even in Superflex, because I don't know if these quarterbacks, any of them, are going to be starters 3 years from now. While I like the talent and I see that, and I see the potential in them, that still has to be realized, and it is tough to realize that at the professional level. So I feel comfortable with him that I'm not going to with Bijan, that I'm not going to have a wasted pick at 101, and right. That could very well happen with any of the 3 quarterbacks. And that's why I have him there. If you want the quarterbacks, I feel like there's question marks with all of them. If you don't have them separated too high, then try to trade back with the 2, 3, or 4 picks and get that value and have an opportunity to make your team better that way and pick up some extra assets to kind of mitigate that risk. Because I really don't know. Maybe you guys feel different. Are you guys comfortable with these 3 quarterbacks?
I'm definitely comfortable with CJ Stroud. I think that the issue we run into, when you did the Justin Fields comparison for Anthony Richardson, I think the thing that I struggle with is Anthony Richardson just isn't as polished in all of the areas, minus the athletic ability.
1 second. Right here, You two vote. Who are you taking at 3 right here if this was you on the clock? Because we're not going to wait for him to come in here and figure it out. We'll just go ahead and kind of vote for who we think should go right here. So you're CJ Stroud.
Oh, he's here. He's in. Look,
okay.
He's there.
Okay. Yeah, but he has like 2 seconds here, so. Okay. So it's Anthony Richardson. So that answers the question. So
I would have said Stroud, but.
So we know from your perspective that it's switched, and I think for you, Kraig, you would have went Richardson there, right?
Yeah, I mean, if my team is bad enough that I'm earning that first pick or one of these early picks for a quarterback, I'm not taking the safe option because I don't think, like to Brad's point, any of them are a Trevor Lawrence type prospect or anything. They all have their issues. They all have concerns where you can see them just not panning out to be where they were drafted. So I'm going to swing for the highest upside, and I feel that's Richardson.
No, I get it.
Okay, and then here comes the Detroit running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, number 12 overall pick. He was already kind of in this range. It was either him or JSN for a lot of people. So this probably fits exactly what you guys would be thinking in this spot.
Oh, yeah, pretty easily.
Yep.
So, do you agree with Jackson Smith and Jigba at 106?
Yes, but I'm drafting the talent, not the situation. I mean, because the situation is he's not going to be super productive in year one, probably, right? Like he's, DK, he's got Tyler Lockett, Noah Fant, running backs. I mean, I think his ceiling for fantasy value in year one is probably more like wide receiver 3 range this year, but he's still the best receiver in this class. You got to take him.
What do you think about JSN and Seattle, Kraig?
Initially, I think it's really nice. They needed a much better third receiver there. Tyler Lockett's, getting a little bit older. They are clearly going for it now, keeping with Geno, and they're building up that team to try to continue to have a deeper run into the playoffs. And if you have any faith that Geno's going to continue to do what he did last year to some level, having a third receiver is great. And that division really feels like it's up for grabs with what's going on there outside of the 49ers, but with a big question mark at quarterback, it might be theirs for the taking in Seattle. So I really like the value that they got with him. He went later than a lot of people were expecting.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not worried about Geno. Geno just came out last year, was great, was especially great when it comes to, on target passes and completion percentage. And I think that we're talking about JSN in a way that it doesn't really live up to how good he is. I think he could come in and be better than Tyler Lockett right off the bat, be way more consistent. I think that he gives both, or he gives that team a for sure option in that passing game, somebody that you can rely on in that 10 to 19 yard range, whereas DK and Tyler Lockett have never really been they've got the volume of targets, but they haven't always converted them at the highest percentage, and I think JSN could really bridge that.
We're getting mentions in the chat that your audio is popping on the stream there, Mr. Rick. Just FYI.
All right, we'll move that back a little bit. Okay, so after that we have Addison and Quentin Johnston. Is that the order you're taking the wide receivers, or do you feel like Zay Flowers is going ahead of those guys? Kraig.
I would take Addison second out of the receivers, and I would probably put Zay Flowers third with Johnson fourth out of them. I know there's the concern that people have with Flowers that it really isn't what Lamar has leaned on. He's still just going to lean on his tight end. They're going to be run heavy. What are they going to be doing with Bateman still there? But Flowers is different enough from Andrews and Bateman. He's that quick, shifty guy that can get you yards after the catch. He's a sort of similar. I think he can be used to how Marquise Brown was there, and he isn't exactly the same player by any means, but he's going to fill that different role. And he has that clear talent that I do like him there with Lamar now set at quarterback. Where Johnson, we've talked about this in the chat, Rick, I think you're in the same boat. Not exactly high on him from what we saw out of him. To me, he's the clear fourth wide receiver, and it's a tier break even after him there. but the inconsistency that I saw out of him and going to be the third clear receiver there too with the Chargers, I'm just higher on Flowers at the moment.
I'm in the same boat. I'm taking Mingo, who, as everybody knows, in these mock drafts that we've been doing over the past month, I think I've taken him in every one of the mock drafts, but it's been like the fourth round, and the NFL really solidified my viewing on Mingo with where he went high, second round. We had heard rumors that he could sneak up into that late first, early second round range, but it was real... You have to be real careful with those late risers in the rookie process that jump. I know it's me, by the way, if that's what you're going to tell me. I was slowing it down a little bit so we could catch up on a little bit of this. But, Brad, even with the fall, you're still comfortable with Will Levis at 109?
Well, so sitting here at 109, 110 range, I'm not touching Zay Flowers in the first round. Like when you look at my rankings, I've got him significantly further down. Quentin Johnson I actually have at 10. So I sat... Right now, I've got Will Levis and Michael Mayer right there, where I'm like, okay, Levis, I like the landing spot in Tennessee. I think long-term, he's a better option as their future quarterback. So I have no problem taking Will Levis at the back of the first round. Sitting at the 1-9, I struggled with going tight end this early just because of how the tight ends fell out. I figured I could come around and get a tight end later, and because there was a lot of guys that I like their landing spot. So in Superflex, I have no problem, reaching on whether you like Levis or somebody there that late. I don't want Zay Flowers. I don't really want Quentin Johnson there, although I had Quentin Johnson at 110. So Shane and Tyjae Spears, I love the landing spots at 11 and 12, though. Those are really great.
Kraig, what are your thoughts on those running backs at 11 or 12, or do you have some other running backs ahead of them? I know I do.
The only one that I might have ahead of them would be Charbonnet, and I know we talk about talent over situation, but there's another talented running back right there that they drafted last year in the second round with Kenneth Walker. So how is that going to split out? Is it going to be more of a 50-50 split, knowing that they can both sort of do the same thing? I need to know how that plays out, where I can see the role immediately for Devin Achane, I can see the role immediately for Tyjae Spears. And given that I like the production that they both have, I'm comfortable with them going ahead of Charbonnet at the moment.
Yeah, Shane is going to be huge.
For me, I do like both of those running backs, but Kendre Miller is my number 3. Another guy that I've loved but was real worried about where he could go, and I think he got the draft capital. I think he was the 4th running back taken, and I will preface this by I got home super late last night, haven't been able to go completely over everything from the draft, but I might get some orders wrong. Gosh dang people. Let me know if his green dot pops up there. But I do think both of those guys are in good spots. We don't know if King Henry's going to be in Tennessee by the time the season starts, or if he's going to be somewhere else. And Spears was already a guy that I liked in that late first round anyway, so that's good. But I do love the New Orleans spot for Miller. We know that even if Alvin Kamara isn't suspended or is on the team, they use multiple backs. We've seen other backs have really solid seasons in New Orleans, even with Alvin Kamara there. So I love that spot for him. And the other one that I want to look at here before we get into Kincaid and Mayer is Detroit and taking Hooker. Are your thoughts that he belongs in the middle of the second round in rookie drafts, or is he somebody that's a little bit further back? Because I don't see him getting a lot of action in year one. I see him learning from Jared Goff. Jared Goff played really, really well last year. Detroit Lions, Homer, Brad, what do you think on Hooker in that spot? And who should we take here for Captain Joe so we don't have to wait?
I mean, Rashee Rice is the guy that I desperately want from Kansas City, anywhere in the middle of the second round. So that would be my choice. Back to Hendon Hooker.
Well, hold on. Kraig, what do you think? Let's get this pick going.
I'd be fine with Rice or Downs. I like both of those. I don't think Josh Downs went yet either.
Nope. Okay, we can go ahead and everybody's good. So, Brad, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I don't think you see Hendon Hooker this year, period, just because of the injury, right? Like he's still bouncing back from the injury. This is a move that's a forward looker, right? Like they're thinking that probably what's going to happen here is that he learns from, and if Goff doesn't resign, and if we see the Goff that we've been seeing in LA where you get a year of great, you get a year of crap, then maybe they say, okay, is Hooker ready? And we're going to throw him in and let him go next year, maybe the year after. I see him as the floor for me is a good backup. The potential is he could be a starter for the team. He does a good job distributing the ball. We saw it at Tennessee. He utilized multiple receivers without any trouble. So I like Hooker's long-term value. I would definitely love to get him somewhere in the middle second round in a rookie draft because you're not going to get to play him anytime soon. And typically early second guys, you're hoping that you get some value out of at least a year or two, at least in the first year or so. What do you think, Kraig?
Yeah, I'm fine with him as the clear fifth quarterback going off the board, but to me, it's like he's sort of in no man's land with these quarterbacks where he went higher than pretty much anyone after him, but he also didn't get the capital Levis did, and there is someone who's established who the coaching staff in Detroit seems to be really comfortable with. So I'm fine taking him, but I'm really not expecting anything more than a backup or occasional spot starter out of him.
So, Brad, we took, as Kraig picks his pick, we took Rice for Captain Joe, and then there's Mims, Downs, and Hyatt right in a row. Do you agree with that?
I think they all are going to be playable fantasy assets. I mean, the nice thing about all these receivers minus, I don't know what to make of Johnston and Zay Flowers year one, but I think the rest of these guys all have a chance to give you some playable fantasy production in year one. Mingo and Rice have guys ahead of them, obviously, in their situations, but I think, and Mims too as well. But I think they all have the opportunity of getting some significant playing time because they're all different than what's already ahead of them. I mean, you think about Rice in KC, there's nobody with his body type. I mean, maybe Justin Ross, but Justin Ross doesn't have the big playability that Rice has. When you look at Downs, nobody in Indianapolis is like Downs. I mean, Pierce and Pittman are big, slower guys. Downs can take the top off the defense and is smaller. Same with Hyatt. There's nobody in New York like him. I mean, so they have an opportunity to be productive in year one. I definitely like them all.
What are your thoughts on that little streak of wide receivers there in the second round, Kraig?
Hyatt just feels like a one-trick pony to me, and plenty of people have made their career out of that in the NFL. He really didn't do a whole lot until this past year. A lot of it was when Tillman was hurt, and he's just a speed guy. And Brad's right that they really don't have that. They have a bunch of smaller slot-type guys at wide receiver in New York, so he is different. How is that going to play out for him, though? It just doesn't seem like a long-term startable fantasy asset where I could see that with Rice. I could see that with Downs. And then depending on what happens, if Russell Wilson actually learns to play quarterback again and they move on from Sutton or who's the other one there, Judy, I certainly could see him. But it's sort of the third guy there, and they're collecting tight ends apparently too now in Denver with Adam Troutman going there, and they're already having Dulcich and Alberto. It just feels like a mess for the receiving game there right now, and I don't know that Mims is going to have a lot of year one value.
I would agree with all of that.
Mm-hmm.
In the second round, we had a split run on tight ends. Kincaid, then Mayer. A little bit different than the order in the NFL draft because Laporta went ahead of Mayer as well, correct? To make sure I'm not messing up all these tight ends.
Laporta and then Mayer went directly after him.
Right. Okay. So then also we've got Musgrave for the Green Bay Packers going in this stretch of four. Kraig, how are you feeling about these tight ends in this 2023 class, and who do we take for Mr. Joe that decided to join and not show up?
The next highest rated guy for me is Michael Wilson, wide receiver, Arizona. But
what do you think about that, Kraig? Where would you be going here?
I think that's fine. I don't have my rankings to completely gather after the draft, but he's right in that range. As far as the tight ends, though, so I right now don't have it completely figured out if I have Laporta 2 or I have Laporta 3. Michael Mayer, I think he's going to be a fine long-term piece in the NFL, but especially with how that team is set up there in Las Vegas, he's not going to be a focal point by any means. With a receiving group there, they're going to be running the ball. I like Kincaid. I think he's certainly going to sort of fill that potential slot type role. It seems like they're going to try to fill with him as another receiving option because that's what he did best there. And Laporta, okay, it's a cliche probably because that's where TJ Hawkinson went and they just got rid of him. But you can see him just sliding in there and filling that pretty much vacant tight end role for Detroit. And they also, Jameson Williams is going to be suspended for a bit. Amon-Ra's there. They went and they got Marvin again. But I could really see outside of the running backs and being that third receiving option long term there. And that just a really nice offense that they've built there. And if they're going to have any sort of good quarterback play out of Goff or Hooker or whoever going forward, it could be a really potent offense. And I think Laporta is going to be a big piece of that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have been very vocal. I think Mayer is. I still think Mayer's the best tight end in this class. I think that whatever offense he ended up in, he was going to end up a focal point in the passing game. I mean, this is a guy that in 30 games at Notre Dame broke the Notre Dame record for receptions at tight end, and it is tight end university or university 1A to 1B, depending on who you talk to, right? But did very well at a school with a rich history of tight ends, and I was very surprised that he dropped to number 3 in this class. I felt like he's been my number 1 in this class for as long as I can remember. I'm not always right, and I am from Indiana and have watched more Notre Dame, but I just feel like this guy can do everything. I feel like he can do everything that you want a tight end to do. He can block, he can catch and do everything, but it is a good tight end class, and it was kind of a surprise to see the separation from those two at the top, and then Musgrave and Laporta. I have a feeling that in a lot of drafts, once one of those guys is taken, then all 3 to 4 of those guys could fall in a real close spot in the draft, starting a little tight end run.
Musgrave going that high is really weird to me because the Packers, they drafted him and then they turned around and they took Tucker Kraft, who's another great receiving tight end, around later. It's like, all right, what are they actually going to be doing with the two of these guys? Green Bay recently doesn't have a very big history of using tight end a whole lot for receiving. Now you could say it's because of who they've had there. They could say because it's Aaron Rodgers and now you have Jordan Love. Maybe they want a couple of those bigger guys closer to the line of scrimmage for those easy targets for him. I'm just completely confused in what they're doing with them, and I'm not looking at Musgrave or Tucker Kraft probably until the range where those other two, Washington and Schoonmaker, went.
Well, and what you saw is teams took tight ends that fit their profile, right? Like Dalton Kincaid gives you Dawson Knox type vibes when you watch him. Sam Laporta went to Detroit because he's a Dan Campbell type player. He's a captain, a leader on his team. He's willing to be physical and aggressive. Not the greatest blocker, but can develop that as a pass catcher. I mean, like Mayer going to Vegas made sense because Vegas needed a tight end, and Mayer was the best one available at that time. So I mean, so the top guys went to places that made sense for the type of player that they were. I mean, so Mayer is still the best tight end in the class, and he's still the one I would take first. I mean, I considered him at 9, like I said, with Levis. So all these tight ends should have potential. Like I even like Luke Schoonmaker to Dallas. I think that's a really intriguing spot. They have one tight end there already that I like in was it Ferguson? I believe is there already. So I could see all these tight ends. I mean, the Darnell Washington one, I struggle with what that really means for the big scheme of things because Freiermuth is very good, but otherwise, all these tight ends are all very draftable in a little different order. I would put Laporta closer to Mayer and Kincaid. I mean, Musgrave I would have put later though, so kind of a toss up.
Okay, real quick here, Kraig, think about who you would take for Captain Joe here, and then Brad. Do you know why there's not a 5th round pick for 10 of the teams?
I don't.
I think it's just not.
I know. I was
wondering
there.
I think it's just not showing on the screen because it's
We'll
showing if you go to the
what
app because
there.
I think it's how.
Oh yeah, I see it all the way through there.
Screen.
Okay. So who would you take here, Kraig? We'll let you pick this pick for Joe.
Bring up my list. Honestly, I mean, we don't have a whole lot of quarterbacks we're looking here, but in a Superflex league, a guy like Jaron Hall is someone who I'd take a look at here as far as trying to figure out a long-term quarterback solution in Minnesota, and him being a guy that's got some mobile ability, and I think he could easily end up being the backup there over Nick Mullins this year. So I'd go quarterback this late in the Superflex league if you're taking a stab at someone.
Brad, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, why not? I mean, Jaden Reed's the guy up next on my board, but take whatever you want.
Jaden Reed went way earlier. He went in the 3rd round.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, he went 3-3, I think.
Yes, 3-3.
Oh, yeah, there he is. Okay, yep. So
which is the next question I was going to ask you guys. Brad, what do you think about this 3rd round that went Cedric Tillman, Tank Bigsby, Jaden Reed, Chase Brown, Zach Evans, Rashawn Johnson, Mike Wilson, Keyshawn Butte, Gray, Washington, Abinaconda, and Tank Dell.
So once you get to the 3rd round, it's you take the you kind of take your favorite guy at the board at the top there. I mean, Rashawn Johnson is a guy that I want all the shares I can get of. I think in Chicago's offense he could be huge. So he would have been the guy kind of targeted really at the end of the second. If Josh Downs wouldn't have been there, I'd have targeted Rashawn. Outside of that, I really like Michael Wilson from Arizona. And then these other guys all kind of fit into a really nice spot. Like Chase Brown could be a starter in Cincinnati. I mean, who knows what happens with Joe Mixon? If you get a potential startable running back in the 3rd round for an offense that high powered, I mean, that's a great thing. So I think a lot of these guys hit spots that are really nice. I mean, I know a lot of folks aren't excited about Tank Bigsby going to Jacksonville, but ETN's not the epitome of health, and they could use multiple running backs. So Bigsby is in a good spot. Tillman to Cleveland's going to be tough because I like a lot of the wide receivers that are already there. So it'll be. I don't know how he fits in, and even Keyshawn Butte. I know a lot of folks are concerned because he went to New England, but that's a spot there. They need a couple of good wide receivers, so he has a chance. I mean, these are all really nice dart throws. I mean, even Tank Dell to Houston, he's different than what they've got there. I mean, that guy, if Mechie's healthy, maybe he doesn't get nearly the type of opportunity, but I think they're all solid spots. What do you think, Kraig? Oh, you're picking. I don't care what you think right now.
My pick here.
What about you, Rick?
I will say that I agree with you. For me, Butte was always a target in this 3rd round because he's a guy that's had the pedigree and the hype and goes to a spot where if he's not in, we're going to know because he's not even going to make that roster, right?
Yep.
He's a guy that I'm trying to look here so I don't misspeak. I mean, there's 15. What wide receiver was even off the board? I mean, he was deep down there, round 6.
13,
he's not even
13,
he's not even guaranteed to make their roster. If he makes their roster, then I feel like he's fitting into the Belichick way, the New England way, and maybe they can tap into that skill, that natural skill that we know he has that hasn't come through, that has him falling from where a lot of people thought at one point, even in this offseason, he could be a late 1st, 2nd round guy, all the way to the 6th round. So I agree, though. I think Reed and Wilson would be the targets of mine out of those wide receivers in that round. I agree with you with Johnson in Chicago. Foreman's only on a 1-year deal. It's only a $3 million deal. So if he doesn't look like he has looked in camp, then he's not somebody that's a guarantee to make the roster. And I think Johnson, with his ability to play special teams, because he had to do that, being the backup to Bijan, you've got an opportunity there to become the starting running back, or at least the 1B to a 1A in Herbert, and kind of have that dynamic duo there. So what were your thoughts on that 3rd round there, Kraig?
I really like Jaden Reed. I liked him pre-draft. I thought he was kind of lower on a lot of people's charts, and he goes to Green Bay, and he fits a role that I think is going to be important for Jordan Reed, sort of that shiftier slot guy. He's very different than Christian Watson, and I think he could fit in well there. So I really like that pick. Brad already spoke on or one of you two spoke on Chase Brown. I like that one there too. Same with Rashawn Johnson. We're all sort of in agreement with that. I really like Brad's, and I didn't see him get picked. Eric Gray pick. I think he's going to be a great backup to Saquon, and who knows what's going to happen with Saquon there long term. I think that's a great pick. Darnell Washington really surprised me. Clearly, there was some sort of medical concern with him that he dropped so much farther than people had expected him to. Is he going to end up being sort of like an offensive lineman? Because they already have Pat Freiermuth, who's shown well in the passing game. That really worries me. Some teams do utilize 2 tight ends, but that can hamper you for fantasy purposes. So I don't have a whole lot of excitement out of Darnell Washington for fantasy. Israel Benakanda I really liked, and draft spot wise, it's like best case he's probably backing up Breece Hall, and they already have Michael Carter there. Who knows what's going to happen? And then Brad spoke to Tank Dell, and that he's just a really nice college player that showed out super well, and he's different enough that he could fit into that offense because they're going to need young guys. They can't just throw to Robert Woods or whatever, and we don't really know what Nico Collins is going to be or how John Mechie is going to show up. So again, late third round dart flyer. I like Tank Dell there.
All right, I'm asking Jack if that's who he wanted there. Let me know, would you, Brad, if you see that. I don't even remember the last question I asked because I'm concentrating.
We're talking about the third round. We were just kind of talking about how the third round.
Okay, so my next question, Kraig, was going to be, what did anything stick out to you in the 4th round of this draft?
Sort of like I mentioned with Hendon Hooker being that no man's land of quarterbacks, we kind of saw that where he was the one. He went in the 2nd round. There was no one in the 3rd round, and then you see people starting to take those quarterback dart throws because it's Superflex in the 4th round. You got Stinson Bennett, who's going to be Matt Stafford's backup potentially, Sharon Hall potentially to Kirk Cousins, Aiden O'Connell to Jimmy Garoppolo, and then Dorian Thompson-Robinson to Deshaun Watson. So it's sort of pick your flavor and what are the odds that you think someone's going to screw up, not be healthy, and what do you think of that quarterback going into the draft? This guy's got relatively comparable draft capital for a lot of them, so I think that's about where you're going to see a lot of these quarterbacks go, just because there's probably not a starter amongst them long term. But if you're handcuffing your quarterback, as some people do in Superflex Dynasty, or if you're just hoping one of them becomes spot starter worthy or season starter worthy if the guy's injured, this is where you're going to see it.
He said, "Yep."
Okay, we're getting her going then. Great content. Thanks, fellas, for sticking around.
This is how mocks go, though. I feel like every mock I take part in, no matter who's running us or anyone else.
Yeah, always somebody joining them and not picking.
Dilly-dallying. So, yeah, the 4th round had some really fun spots for guys. Like, I want to take shots on Bennett. I want to take shots on some of these other quarterbacks that fell down a little bit, just, because most of the time in the leagues that I'm in, these are taxi squad guys. Throwing them on there, stashing them, seeing what happens. So, I know Thomas on the team seeing Evan Hall in the 4th round is probably super excited. He'd probably jump all over that earlier than that. But, Dwayne McBride, Deuce Vaughn going to Dallas, I think is really intriguing, So a lot of fun spots, a lot of fun guys landing. A.T. Perry, I'm a huge fan of. If you watched our short, I talked him up. I liked A.T. Perry. So going to New Orleans, in a year or two could be a really intriguing landing spot for him. And I took Puka Nakua to the Rams because they need some depth at wide receiver. They would be a really interesting long-term play there, So they're a lot of fun spots. From the 3rd round on, I think a lot of these kind of dart throw guys are pretty decently put. I would be okay taking most of these guys there.
I am completely on board with that as I try to get my last pick in here. What is your favorite pick so far of the 5th round, Kraig? Where did he go?
Probably Chris Rodriguez to Washington. We don't really know what's going to become of Antonio Gibson. I think he's a free agent after this year. We got Brian Robinson there, who sort of seems like he's the starter. So, stumbling over my words. Brad would know Chris Rodriguez better than I would, but he's got a different skill set. He's a different kind of player than what he had with Brian Robinson, where he's shiftier. I think he's a better pass-catching type of guy, and he could end up filling that role if Antonio Gibson ends up leaving. So, long-term guy to put on your taxi squad, like Brad said earlier, and see if he becomes something. I think Rodriguez fits there what Ron Rivera likes.
Make this pick for us while you're there, Kraig.
All right, let me bring up my list. Give me Andre Silvis, the wide receiver for Cincinnati.
Oh, shoot.
Brad Gilbert coming in the chat with a awesome IDP question. I actually am working on updating my RotoHeat.com IDP rankings as it stands, and I'm definitely considering both of those guys in the kind of mid-second round range, maybe even early second round for Will Anderson. Kraig, what do you think about those two in rookie drafts?
There's not a ton of IDP players that, with the landing spot and the talent, just made me super excited to draft them, and I'm probably going to have some of these guys fall later than I normally would look at taking the top-end talent. Jack Campbell, the problem with him initially is that he is going to be splitting, as far as they're both probably starting him with Alex Anzalone, and they're going to eat into each other, and that's if they both end up getting those starter percent snaps, which you know as well as anyone on the stream here, Dan Campbell has enjoyed playing linebacker games with reps and does the same thing on the defensive line. So I like Anderson more than I like Jack Campbell. Anderson should have been the first defensive player taken, and he was. Without a whole lot of talent around him, I think it's going to take some creativity on D'Amico Ryan's part to get him the production that we want for IDP leagues. So he certainly can do it, and he'd be the first one that I'd take, but it's probably late second round for me. Probably
I
right
don't have any
around that wide receiver run that we talked about, maybe a little bit earlier.
I don't have any opinion on the IDP part. I don't have any useful knowledge to drop to you visitors here of the stream. So I will let their takes handle that and agree with all of it.
There wasn't a super exciting true linebacker spot for anyone that was taken high in this draft, which is, unfortunate for IDP players.
All right, Brad. Pause. Dang it.
He got his pick in, I think.
Did he?
Yeah, Parker Washington would have been the highest rated guy in my draft anyway. So
okay, perfect. It got close there. I wanted to make sure not to.
That's all right. Allows me to take a stab at Derek Carr 2.0 in New Orleans there with Jake Haener. I mean, how did New Orleans wind up doing that? They signed Derek Carr and then they drafted Derek Carr.
And then the very next team, didn't the Rams, the very next pick, do the same thing?
Stetson Bennett. Yeah.
Stetson Bennett.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing, though, I mean, and Stafford and Bennett aren't, I mean, they're different player types, obviously, because, Stafford's got a crazy arm and some of that. But Jake Haener really does have a lot of Derek Carr's traits. I mean, he's a little bit smaller, obviously, but Jake Haener's one of those guys that is the hardest worker in the room type guy, which is why I would love to take a shot on him late. Same with Bennett. I mean, those two, when looking at my rankings, those two were guys that I have no problem stashing on my taxi squad to see what happens. I mean, we know Matthew Stafford's super healthy, so Stetson Bennett may never see the field, right? Jake Haener, on the other hand, probably won't see the field anytime soon, but I'm intrigued to see at least what, maybe they're thinking, okay, this is the type of player we want in our offense, so after Derek Carr's gone, maybe he then has a chance. I don't know, but I'll take that chance in Superflex.
Kraig, out of these the second 5 QBs that are grouped here from the 4th and 5th round, which one of these are you most likely to be taking shots on?
Jaron Hall and Dorian Thompson-Robinson in some order, because I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson is similar to what they have in Deshaun Watson. It's not like they're going to have to change the offense to do a whole lot, and not at the same level, but a similar type of player. And then Jaron Hall, just because, again, he's an athletic guy with a good arm, and I think he could end up being a good starter, for a backup if he ends up sticking there in Minnesota, or if he has to fill in for Kirk Cousins at some point long term. And really, who knows what they're going to do with Kirk Cousins after this year? I don't think they can keep paying him these huge guaranteed type contracts.
As Kraig closes this out, we are going to talk a little bit more as we fill this draft up, and we will have a 1 QB Superflex rookie mock right after that. So let me make sure. Well, that was the plan, and probably because we're the only three in it now. It was full at one point, but probably because that first draft went way longer than it should. Because what are you gonna do?
That's how it happens.
Well, I mean, if we would have had people here picking, might have went a little faster. Yeah, that thing was full at one point, so that's awesome. Maybe we won't get the one QB, and one QB has been extremely hard to fill this year, unlike past years. I think Superflex is just dominating the Dynasty startup landscape right now, and people aren't playing one QB as much.
One thing I wanted to bring up in our draft that we didn't talk about very much, I don't think, we had a guy who went undrafted go in the middle of the third round there with Zach Evans. He just went to a great landing spot where it's Cam Akers and Kyron Williams and not a whole lot else. He was a guy that was talked up a lot pre-draft on a whole bunch of different places as a guy that people had in their top 10 anyway, running backs for the most part, and I think a lot of us did too. I'm sorry, he went in the 6th round. What am I talking about? But
I mean, he went way later than
draft
people
capital.
Thought,
yeah, the 6th round draft capital at pick 215 when I think there were like 249 picks is a huge fall for him. But if you don't talk about a good place to go where he could end up getting snaps, that's pretty high in a draft for what you'd think of a 6th round pick normally.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I didn't expect him to drop that far. One of the reasons why I was a big Miller fan was obviously Evans was very highly touted coming into college, and Miller ended up basically running him out of TCU by, taking those snaps and that job away from him. And that's why he, part of the reason why he moved from TCU. But I did not expect him to drop to the 6th round, but I do agree with you. We've seen that, and this can be said for Zach Charbonnet too, right? Like Seattle uses a lot of running backs, and a lot of times it's not because of choice, but they did not want to get into a spot where if Walker misses time, they don't have a guy because last year I think they had 5 running backs that they used quite a bit because of injuries, and injuries have been there for years now. They haven't been able to keep anybody healthy. Rashad Penny. We've seen similar stuff in LA, and I think Zach Evans could get a shot there because of that. Just as you said. So I agree there. Which player in this draft is lower, picked later than that you want to be taking earlier, if that makes sense? Brad.
Probably Roschon Johnson. I mean, I'm gonna keep banging that drum, but man, like I'm really would consider him mid to late 2nd round. Like when we do that wide receiver run, I would definitely consider Roschon Johnson right there. What about you, Kraig?
I like that answer, and I said it before, but Jaden Reed I would take up with that other grouping of wide receivers we had in sort of the end of 2nd round.
Reed, I think, is the one that I was going to say first. Obviously, I took Johnson, so I like him as well. But I think that Green Bay, we don't really know how that wide receiver core is going to pan out in Green Bay. I think that Reed is talented enough that he could be the number 2 in Green Bay, which could be a very, very lucrative spot for him.
And I will say,
go ahead.
Let me know when you're done. I got some Seattle stats and thoughts based on this whole Zach Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker thing.
Go ahead.
Well, so outside of yes, you're right. They had 4 other running backs outside of Kenneth Walker play at least double digits or get at least double-digit carries. DJ Dallas is still on the roster, and he got 35 carries last year on top of some receptions. But Rashad Penny had 57 touches and some targets as well. And then Travis Homer had 19. Tony Jones had 8. I mean, so, I wouldn't blame anyone for dropping Zach Charbonnet down a little bit, mid to late 2nd, because short of a Kenneth Walker injury, I mean, Kenneth Walker's just eating up all those carries. 228 carries last year, and there were injuries sprinkled in there. But it's like if they're both healthy, Zach Charbonnet is going to get you what, 50 to 80 touches. I mean, that's just at that point you're really struggling if you're trusting him as your RB3 or 4, depending on how your team's set up, right?
To counter that, my view on this is if Rashad Penny was healthy, that would have been completely different. I think that Charbonnet is way better than the other guys that get the homers, the Dallases, those guys,
Tony,
right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I would take the over on 80 attempts for Charbonnet. I would be more in the 125 to 150 range if Walker is healthy the entire year. I don't think they take him as highly as they did in this draft if they didn't plan on using him and having some sort of split backfield, which isn't the end of the world for any running back. We have very few running backs that aren't in that situation, right? Kraig, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it could be a lot closer to a true split, to your point. If Rashad Penny is healthy, which seems to be a never-ending question for fantasy football in the NFL, it would have been different. The nice thing is that they know what Kenneth Walker can do, and they can lean on him if they have to, but Charbonnet just gives them another guy, so they don't necessarily have to lean on one guy as much, and hopefully they don't have people getting hurt as much. And it just helps out their team overall if they have a fresh guy in there consistently.
Kraig, are there any other points to this NFL draft, the rookie draft, this Superflex draft, or just rookie rankings in general that you want to make a point of that crossed your mind over this whole process over the past 3 days?
We, like you always say, we don't know half as much as we think we know. That's a big part of it. And the only other thing is, pay attention to these undrafted free agent signings. Those are coming in hot, even as we're speaking right now. I guess we talked about earlier, Sean Tucker, he's signed with Tampa Bay, which I think is a great landing spot for him to find potential value. A lot of people think Rachaad White's going to be the guy there, and it certainly appears that way, although there's a lot of veterans out there that can spoil anybody's plans for just taking over completely a backfield. But if you're talking about a young guy that could find a spot on the offense that's going to be rebuilding, him finding a spot, there's one. And just because I'm an IDP guy and I have to throw it out there, Ivan Pace signing with the Minnesota Vikings, that's certainly a spot that he could find long-term value and end up starting eventually too with what they have there and sort of turning over that linebacking group.
Man, the other UDFA signing that's going to be juicy for fantasy is Keaton Mitchell, super fast running back out of East Carolina, went to the Baltimore Ravens. Yep. Cool, I'm getting him on my taxi squad. That's going to be ridiculous because we know what's ahead of him doesn't stay healthy. That kid's going to get some rushing attempts.
I wanted to speak on your just on the Sean Tucker thing that you were talking about signing there. I do think that's very interesting because I feel like pre-draft he was talked about in a lot of the same ways that White was talked about last year before the draft, and I do think that he could compete for touches there if healthy. If that health concern that made him drop in this draft is solidified, that is a great spot for him to be in. So I will go with that.
Brandon Joseph going to Detroit is an interesting one, too, the safety from Notre Dame.
Mohamed Ibrahim went there, too, Brad.
Oh, yeah, I see. Oh, I love Mohamed. That's a weird spot, though. Gosh, I like that running back, too.
Jaws in the house.
Jaws,
what up, Jaws?
Andre Carter to Minnesota is not bad either. The edge rusher from Army. I completely forgot he completely fell out of the draft.
So now, for me, since you guys are the IDP guys, and you know that I'm not as up to speed on them, my Bears took 3 guys in a cluster there in the late second, early third. I want to know what your guys' thoughts were on them, and are they fantasy relevant? With the whole not knowing who's going to be outside on that defensive line, who's going to be inside. But what were your thoughts on the Bears' defensive picks there, late second, early first? Or third, not first. Brad.
Oh, I thought I was giving Kraig the floor first. I mean, better NFL picks than fantasy. Tyreek Stevenson's purely a corner. I don't know that that's really going to get you super excited. And the other two, both look like more interior defensive linemen. So if you have to start a defensive tackle, I mean, Gervin Dexter's would be the one I would be interested in if you have to start defensive tackle. But most IDP leagues, you're not forced to start that position. So better NFL prospects. I love that they did it. As a lineman guy, I love those two interior linemen. Those are both two guys that I liked. NFL wise, fantasy wise, I don't think it's super intriguing. Correct?
Just to touch on that real quick, do you know the reason early in the process Jervon was projected and mocked a lot in the top 15 of the first round? What was the reason why he dropped from the first to the late second?
Because mock drafters don't know anything.
We don't know what we're doing when we're mocking that early.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that has some really strong traits, but at the same time, I mean, he's probably a 2-down defensive tackle, and I just don't know. I mean, we saw a lot of defensive tackles kind of slide down a little bit there. So unless you're elite, I mean, mocking is such sweet sorrow.
Out of those three, I'm a big fan of Gervin Dexter, actually. I mean, he is super athletic for a guy that big. He's 6'6", like 310 pounds. He didn't start playing football until I think it was his junior year of high school. He'd been a basketball player before. He sort of had to get roped into playing football. He's still, learning the nuances of it. But his athleticism and the fact that he's able to get tackles, which, a lot of defensive tackles in college aren't getting high tackle numbers. Christian Barmore, if you look at a guy that went, I think, the early second round, the year he was drafted to the Patriots, he didn't get very many tackles at all. In the past 2 years, Gervin Dexter's gotten over 50 or over combined tackles, which is, if you're wanting something out of a defensive tackle that you have to start, it's getting tackles, because most of them you can't trust to get those big pressure plays. So the fact that he already has that down and he has that potential to get you those tackles for a loss and sacks going forward, if he can learn the nuances, he's going to get playing time. Rick, the Bears are rebuilding that defensive front. So he's the one I'm actually really excited for out of the group.
Awesome. I was wondering. I obviously did a little bit of my own research. I didn't know if there was anything specific I missed that kind of dropped him. Bad pro day, something bad at the combine or whatever. I love hearing it. Out of all the players not picked in this mock draft, Kraig, which one would you have taken here in the 5th round that didn't make the cut in this mock?
We brought him up, but I'd probably, if I knew about it before I made the pick, I probably would have taken Sean Tucker over Zach Kuntz, the tight end for the Jets. Athletically, he's amazing. He's still just completely learning the position, and he's not going to see the field anytime soon, whereas Tucker at least has that potential, and we've seen it out of him in college.
Brad, what about you?
I'll go different. I'll go tight end Josh Wiley, went to Tennessee. He's kind of like Kuntz and some of these other guys that are going to need some time and development, but I think he could develop into a nice pass catcher. He has pretty good hands. He's got plus athletic ability. I think he brings a different dynamic to their team. So give me a tight end there. I would probably take him over. I don't know if I'd take him over Zach Kuntz, but I would have taken him over like Clayton Tune. I'm not a huge Tune fan, but
another guy, if I can just throw a name up for someone who wasn't drafted, Travis Dye, who had a nice career at Oregon, and then he went to USC. He signed with the Packers, and they're sort of rebuilding that team. Aaron Jones is getting up there a little bit in age. Who knows if they're going to keep A.J. Dillon around? I could certainly see Travis Dye sticking around as that third running back and being something down the road too.
And Kansas City did sign a running back, undrafted free agent running back from Tulsa, which we made a short on as well, Deneric Prince. You never know with KC and running back, so anything's possible there.
Absolutely. Brad, is there anything else you want to add at the end of this mock draft to encapsulate everything that we've talked about today, or bring up something that we haven't talked about?
Well, thinking about our one QB one, because we talked about struggling to fill it. I treat my one QB very similar in terms of how I project a lot of these players. The quarterbacks, I just slide way down, right? If you're trying to figure out what to do in a single quarterback and all you're seeing is things like this where you're getting Superflex, because I've got some one QB leagues I'm still a part of. I rate these guys very similarly. Running backs I might bump up a little more depending on scoring, but otherwise, you're kind of looking at the way the board would fall out. I would bump down a couple tight ends probably, unless it's tight end premium. But otherwise, I mean, yeah, Superflex is king right now, but one quarterback is still very, very viable format.
Craig, what about yourself?
The biggest thing I can say in regards to this, and I say it on I think almost every show that I ever do, and know your league, know your format, and know the teams that you're facing against. I have a 14-team single quarterback league that's been going for like 12 years, something like that now. And if you rewind a couple draft classes to the Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields draft class, 5 quarterbacks went in the first round in a single QB league, just because people hoard QBs in that league. Because they say, oh, there's 14 teams, it's harder. I mean, to a degree. So anything that you're in, you got to know your league. You got to know how they draft. And if it's something where your league thinks, well, it's one quarterback, quarterbacks fall to the third round normally, don't worry about it at that point. You can hold off and get some of these other more valuable positions. Whereas if it's a league like mine and they're going and you need a quarterback, trading for him might not be easy. You might have to reach to draft one. But for your general standard type of league, the earliest that I've seen, even in just mock drafts after the draft here for one quarterback leagues, around that turn at the end of the first, start of the second, I've seen the top quarterbacks go.
Jaws wants to know, Kareem Hunt still have the juice? Been trying to figure out what to do with him. Seems like motivation might have been an issue after refusing to pay or move him. What are your thoughts, Craig, on Mr. Kareem Hunt? Is he going to get signed and be a fantasy asset in 2023?
I don't think he's a fantasy asset you can really count on going into 2023. The juice started to go out of him towards the end of 2022. Really hasn't been a market for him. And, we've seen there's already still a bunch of running backs still out there on the market, like in terms of Fournette. You got Zeke still out there, who Dallas apparently has said the door's still open for him if he wants to show up. So don't go counting your Tony Pollard chickens' eggs before they hatch, or whatever that euphemism is. So, yeah, I would hold on to Kareem Hunt. I'm not ditching him by any means, but I'm not expecting anything out of maybe a bye week sub-in or something if I have to at this point.
Well, I think a lot of the running backs in that range, if they're not high end, they have to wait for the draft. They have to wait to see if teams can fill that. Teams want to fill that spot with the cheapest option possible that they're comfortable with. And I think those guys had to wait. I think we'll see them fall. We'll see them sign here soon. Or after we see some, we're going to have some spring injuries once they get out there and start getting into workouts and stuff, and that may open the door for those guys, but it's tough to know where they're going to end up, what their role's going to be. They could end up, Hunt could end up taking a job behind Saquon Barkley or behind CMC, and then he's going to be very, very limited no matter what. So it is tough. What are your thoughts there, Brad? I know you put something in the chat. Similar view.
Yeah, it's a struggle to project them. But these are the guys, these veterans are the guys that either, like you said, sign after the draft or during camp when injuries happen, or in season when injuries happen. And for fantasy, it's like if he's on your roster and maybe there's a guy you really like, I dump him and get him. If there's somebody sitting out there that you're in love with, or you're up in the draft and you're super excited about a guy, I wouldn't be afraid to let go of him. I mean, nobody's going to think that you're a terrible football owner if you decide to drop a guy who hasn't really been fantasy relevant in over a year. I mean, he got you a little bit of action last year, but not enough to really be excited about him. So he's one of those guys that his name is more valuable at this point than the actual production. So I'm okay with cutting ties if I have a spot that I need available.
My last question here to end this stream, unless you guys have anything to add after it, is Antonio Brown coming back and playing for the Baltimore Ravens, or is he trolling the internet or insinuating that he is returning to the league because he has been working out with Zay Flowers? Brad.
I mean, he probably wants to get back in the league, right? He likes to be in the spotlight and likes to have people looking at him, but I mean, Baltimore signed Odell. I mean, they've got all these other receivers, right? Like, what do they need another one like that for? I mean, that's why I struggle with my projection for Zay Flowers in this, because, a team like Baltimore's got 40 receivers. We didn't even mention Devin Duvernay and Tyler Wallace and these other guys that they thought they liked a year ago. So if he comes back, it's another one of those situations where he comes back as a camp tryout, or maybe a guy that comes in when injury happens. If a team really wants to deal with teams do not want to deal with that kind of headache anymore. So I can't imagine he comes back, but I'm sure he probably wants to. What about you, Kraig?
He just wants to be in the news, and he saw an opportunity, so he got his name out there. And the Redskins, I'm sure he wants to go back to a situation. I'm sure he would love to pick the team and the pay that he goes to, but I think he sort of wore out his welcome in the league, especially with the stuff that he's done off the field since then.
You guys took my question way more serious than I intended. No, but a serious question about the Ravens. A serious question about the Ravens and their passing game is, do we think that it's going to change drastically with the new offensive coordinator and a potential new offense? Do you think now that they're paying him as the highest paid player in NFL history, that they are going to use his arm a lot more and use the passing game a lot more in Baltimore here in 2023 and going forward? Kraig.
Yeah, I do. If you look at the offense that Todd Monken had in college, it's way different than what they had before. And I don't think you can take that asset that you have in Lamar Jackson and just constantly run him down people's throats, because he's going to continue to get hurt, and you can't do that with that asset that you have. They're still going to use him that way, but he's going to be passing more, and I think it's going to be passing in more creative ways.
Brad.
Make sure you got Tyler Huntley on your roster. I mean, that's all I can say about that. The offense is going to be different, but can Lamar stay healthy?
Do not hedge Lamar Jackson with Tyler Huntley. If you have Lamar and you aren't feeling comfortable, find yourself another starting NFL quarterback. Tyler Huntley has not been good for fantasy even when he filled in for Lamar Jackson.
I'm just saying, I'm not a Lamar guy. You're a Lamar guy.
From a fantasy perspective, find yourself another Lamar backup that doesn't have the name of Tyler Huntley. Kraig, to your point, he was a Pro Bowler, and I'm being a little insensitive.
See what you've done, Rick?
No, you wanted to stop being serious, so now we're going down.
Lamar Jackson's a 62% completion percentage type guy, so he's definitely viable. I just don't, the health is a big concern for me. So I would, at this point, I'd be looking to trade Lamar for a quarterback I want more. Honestly,
see, I have a hard time with the whole completion percentage thing with Lamar, because there's been a severe deficiency of wide receiver talent on Baltimore's team since he came into the league. I think he easily right now has the best wide receiver core that he's ever had. If you remember when he came in, Willie Snead was his number one wide receiver. They drafted Hollywood Brown hoping he would be that guy. He had flashes, but was injured a lot. They brought in Rashad Bateman to hopefully fill that spot to pair with Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown stayed injured. Rashad Bateman stayed injured. And then they shipped Hollywood Brown out. And then Rashad Bateman stayed injured. And
this whole Baltimore team, right? Running backs injured, yes. Quarterback injured.
But that's kind of to my point, is they've never been. I mean, Devin Duvernay isn't the wide receiver I had hoped he would be. He's not a wide receiver you can rely on that you're going to have high percentage throws to. And then the backups after that have been like really bad. So part of that is kind of their lack of focus on the passing game, I think, and talent in the receiver core. Obviously, Lamar's not your 80% completion guy, but I do think that with this wide receiver core, his completion percentage can go up and that passing game can be more powerful with a three-headed monster. Again, they have to stay healthy. But I do think that they're better than they have been since Lamar got there.
Just to rib you a little bit, I bet with this wide receiver core, he gets closer to what Tyler Huntley's completion percentage was last year at 67%.
You having a high completion percentage doesn't make you good either,
I know,
right? Like I'm not a big fan of. Well, I know, but I mean, Mac Jones, we saw him with a super high completion percentage in 2021 and almost lose his job to Bailey Zappi in 2022, right?
Thanks, Matt Patricia.
And Purdy in 49er land, like high completion percentage, but it's not all created equal, right? Drew Brees went from 62% early in his career to matching up with after 3 seasons, mind you, not just early in his career. After 3 seasons, he was only at 62% and ended up retiring with the highest career completion percentage of all time. A lot of those were short passes. He had one of the lowest ADOTs. Patrick Mahomes has one of the lowest ADOTs in the NFL right now because they're taking those higher percentage. So it depends, right? Jalen Hurts is lower, but he's also at the top of the list in intended air yards per pass attempt. So I think looking at just completion percentage is a very it's kind of like looking at a running back's yards per carry, right? Like your yards per carry if you're playing behind the Philadelphia Eagles offensive line with the threat of Jalen Hurts is going to be higher, more efficient than it is if you're playing behind a bad offensive line with a quarterback that's a statue. There's just different things when it comes to that. But Tyler Huntley, my thing was for fantasy. He doesn't put up fantasy points. I mean, I think he's only had like 2 games above 16. One of them was a 40-point game, but I think that got stuck in everybody's head. And when he filled in last year, they thought he was going to be like a fantasy monster, and it just didn't happen. What are we doing with later first-round Dynasty rookie picks? Feel like I need to move them.
Skip over Jaws, too.
Oh, we'll get to Jaws. We've answered about 10,000 Jaws questions. We can get in here with DP for a second. We will get to Jaws' question. But, Kraig, what do you think about this? Are you moving picks? Because this is something I've been advocating myself. After the 105, 106 pick, are you just looking to move those picks into, like, veterans that you're comfortable with? Or future first-round picks, if you can get them? What are you doing with those later first-round picks and Dynasty rookies? You're muted, I think.
I am. If you're in a position where you're not going to be getting someone that you're comfortable with, or you're really like the landing spot, or sort of at a tier break where you're going into the next tier and you don't want to be starting off a tier, you'd rather try to move back. I'm perfectly comfortable moving to a back half of a tier, later down in the end of the first round or into the second round, or moving it to a 2024 first where you don't know what it could be. Yeah, you got to wait that year, but it could certainly end up being higher next year. And who knows about next year's draft class? Everyone said, "Oh, this one was going to be amazing," and then people seem to have soured on it. So it's always a dart throw for that. But then there's going to be veterans too available out there where people get rookie fever and they want to move up because someone they like dropped. So put feelers out there, see what you can get for it, and see if you can get something you like instead of just sitting there and taking someone you're not going to be happy with.
Yeah, I'll tell you, in a 16-team league, the day before the draft, I believe, I traded the 106 for Calvin Ridley, Michael Gallup, and a second this year. I think like 210 or 211. So I wasn't afraid. It's a team that needed wide receivers, so I'd rather take a chance on guys that I know are productive versus a rookie at 1/6 that may or may not be productive. So I was perfectly fine with that. Actually, in another league that started drafting during the draft, I mean, no timer, it doesn't really start till Monday. I've got like 3 or 4 firsts in that, and I've already got people asking me about the 1/7, 1/8, and I'm perfectly fine trading them. Running back, wide receiver help, future picks. I mean, if you want Marvin Harrison Jr., who's probably going to be coming next year, I would definitely be willing to shop a couple of my later firsts from 1/7 on to see if maybe I can get a chance at a pick that turns into a super early first so you can go get that wide receiver you love, because I've had multiple people DM me and ask that question here this weekend. Don't be afraid to do it. This class is not that intriguing where I would rather take shots later in the draft on guys that I like that fell down in the NFL draft. I mean, like we said, from Roschon Johnson on, a lot of guys landed in spots where like, oh, this could really be productive for me. So,
yeah, I'm the same way. There are some running backs that if they're on the board, I would be willing to take with those picks, but there are not a lot of wide receivers that I'm going to want to take. Mingo is one that I've fallen in love with over the past 3 weeks. And then, some of those running backs we talked about earlier, the Millers and Johnsons and stuff that I would be willing to take. But if it's at the end of the first round, like I don't want a lot of Johnson, Flowers, Addison. I'm willing to trade out of those spots and hopefully get a veteran the way I would be approaching it is trying to get the veteran to help my team. I feel like I'm probably in a competing spot if I'm in that back half of the first round. I'll take the veteran to help me now, and then maybe get a future second or a second rounder in this draft and take shots on those guys that I can get in the second round. So I agree with that 100%. How much action is Minshew Mustache going to get this year, Kraig?
I think he should definitely start the season as the starter, and I think he could hold on to it for a while. I don't know why they would completely just go with Richardson right off the bat when you have a guy that's capable of starting and doing all right with what they have there for a team. Richardson needs to get acclimated to NFL play, and he needs to get reps. Throwing him out to the Wolves, we see this all the time with young guys. It just doesn't feel like it's always the best idea. A lot of people think it is, we've invested in this, we need to get a return. He needs to just get better at playing quarterback. He's the athlete. He needs to learn the nuances. I think he's in a place where he can, but I think you're going to harm him just throwing him out there right away. As much as we might want it for fantasy, if I'm the Colts, I would go into it expecting him to be the backup and be learning that way this year.
I 100% agree with you, but there are already people, I'm reading ESPN and both Yahoo Sports, Jim Irsay saying Anthony Richardson will start this season. I mean, if your owner
we'll see
is
when he starts then.
Yeah, right. So that would be the next question is, how much does he start? Man, I hope Minshew plays because Minshew can run that offense, right? He was with Steichen in Philly last year. He knows the scheme. Let him play. I mean, it's not like this team is competing. I don't think they're even competing for the AFC South anytime soon. I mean, they need a little bit more help. So why start your rookie who needs the most development of any of these quarterbacks that went in the first two rounds? Like, why? You're only going to hurt his development. I mean, didn't anybody watch the Texans in the early 2000s ruin David Carr because they threw him out and they couldn't protect him, right? I mean, David Carr wasn't great. Obviously, I'm going to tell you that David Carr wasn't my favorite quarterback that came out that year, but putting him out too early, you just don't give him a chance.
My thing is, I think David Carr could have been good. I do think he got ruined, but I think there's a significant difference. Whereas Indianapolis, like their line was bad last year, but it shouldn't have been. Like they've got the talent on their offensive line, and also outside of that, Anthony Richardson can do stuff to get out of that trouble that David Carr could never imagine of doing. And I feel like out of all the quarterbacks that were taken in the first round, the Colts have the best offensive setup with the offensive line. They've got the all-world running back. They've got a true number one receiver, I believe, in Michael Pittman, who has produced with atrocious quarterback play in Indianapolis. I do think that starting the season isn't necessary. But if you want to win games in Indianapolis and you've got teams, if Leonard is healthy on defense, your defense could be a lot better. That's a big if. Is that what your eyebrow raise was for there, Kraig? It's big if now, huh? But I think Richardson gives your NFL team the best chance to win games. And if that is your goal in Indianapolis, you're not going to be able to keep him on the bench because he can do things for your offense that Minshew just can't do. And Minshew's a good game manager, but if you want the guy to take you over the top, I think you got to rely on Richardson's athleticism a little bit. I do think that Richardson, when it comes to the passing game, didn't get a lot of help in college either. He didn't have a lot of help last year on the outside with receivers, but you're not going to be able to keep him down for very long. I don't see him being on the bench past game 4 or 5 unless he's just being really bad in practice and they really got it wrong, because that fan base they don't want to see Minshew right now. They're done. They're done with Minshew after that pick. They want to see Anthony Richardson, and they're going to speak their voices. Brad, here in Indiana, they're not gonna settle here to not have him on the field after giving him that draft capital. I think he starts fairly soon. It may be 4 or 5 games into the season, but I don't think they're going to be able to keep him down very long. Last question here. Thoughts on Swift's fantasy value now with Philly? Is he a buy, sell, or hold? Brad, Detroit Lions, trade him to Philly. Buy, sell, or hold?
Sell. I'm getting rid of him as quickly as I can.
Kraig.
I'm holding him. I mean, the talent's there. He has to stay healthy, which always is a concern. They just have a lot of running options. Starting with Hurts, they got Gainwell, Boston Scott, Penny, who they went and got. You're going to have to see how it plays out. I'm not selling him because I don't think you're going to get someone to just completely buy into it because he's going there and Jalen Hurts is the main running back, if you want to consider him since he's a running quarterback. But I think there is potential he could lead that backfield as far as the true running backs, and he touches this year anyway. So I'm holding on to him because I still really like the guy. It's just a murky situation that he went to as opposed to Detroit where it was already murky anyway too. I don't think it's that big of a difference.
I'm on the sell wagon, and it's mostly because I've never been super high on Swift anyway. But it's more of the fact that I think there is the Eagles hype that he gets from this trade. Eagles being as good as they are, the running backs being as efficient as they have been in that offense. With their running quarterback, it helps the running backs. I mean, we saw the worst team in the NFL last year that had the number 1 pick rush for over 3,000 yards, break the Bears record, and lead the NFL. And it's part of the Justin Fields effect, right? Because you got to worry about that quarterback, and that helps the efficiency of your offense. You see the same thing with the J.K. Dobbins 2 years before his injury was like the most efficient running back we've ever seen in his, the back half of his rookie year. And then Miles Sanders has always been real efficient. Devin Singletary in Buffalo, always really efficient. So I think he is a sell just because I feel like I can get a better player that I'm less concerned with for Swift right now with the Philadelphia Eagles hype, because I think he got crushed on one day and then got the best possible situation coming out of Detroit, going to Philly and that offense. Any last points, sir, Kraig? I know you got to get out of here.
Nope. Just take a breather and don't do anything crazy when you're going into drafts just based off of your initial gut reactions. It shouldn't completely set your rankings on fire if you already had them set ahead of time. So,
Brad.
Yeah, I mean, don't be afraid to trade would be my statement here, because this first round is people are going to reach for guys, so don't be afraid. I'm actively trying to trade backwards in almost every league I'm in if I don't love who's there in that area. So don't be afraid to trade.
I would say, and I'm not a big advocate of this very often, but this is a draft where if you have late first, don't be afraid to try to find your way into the top half of the first round either. If you're a team that is back there and are competing and you want to try to get up there and get a JSN or get a Jahmyr Gibbs or get one of those quarterbacks, I wouldn't be afraid to do that in this class either. I feel like you're better off paying a little bit extra to move into that top half than wasting your picks on some of the guys that you could have to draft in that back half of the first round. But that is going to close out the mock draft, post NFL draft. I hope everybody had a fun week. It was fun being in KC despite the terrible amenities that the NFL has set up at these drafts. But it was fun, and I'm excited to dig in and learn more about all this stuff now that I'm home and have the ability to do that. Thank you guys for being here and having me tonight. And I'm looking forward to see how this ADP pans out after the NFL draft.
It'd be huge. Thank you guys.